In the previous video, we looked at dividing fractions, but none of those questions involved mixed numbers. In this video, we're going to have mixed numbers involved, but we're also going to look at some really good mathematician habits that will help you loads with division. So before we look at this first question, let's consider some things we already know about division involving just positive numbers for now. To recap then, here are some things you should already be comfortable with. Let's say you have a number and you divide it by itself. The answer will be 1. Now, if you have a number and you divide it by something smaller, let's say 4 divided by 3, you'll get an answer that is greater than 1. But if we start with a number and divide it by something greater, let's say 4 divided by 5, you'll get an answer that is less than 1. Finally, I want to think about dividing when we've got quantities with units. For example, let's say I am dividing 14 centimetres by 2 centimetres. So in other words, how many lots of 2 centimetres go into 14 centimetres? The answer is just 7. It's not 7 centimetres, it's just 7. Think about how many strips of 2 centimetres I could cut from a 14 centimetre long strip. It would be 7 strips. So these are some important ideas that we'll keep in mind as we do the examples in this video. Let's start with the first one then. We have 27 over 4 divided by 27 over 5. Now if we just do what we did before, we know that we can do 27 over 4 and multiply it by the reciprocal of 27/5. So that's going to be 5/27. Now, a really slow way of doing this would be to actually multiply 27 and 5 and the 4 and 27 to get 135 over 108. And then you would have to simplify this fraction. Now, this one is not obvious to simplify if you just had this to start with, but of course you know that 27 goes into the numerator and the denominator because the numerator is 5 lots of 27 and the denominator is 4 lots of 27. So you could divide the numerator and denominator by 27 to get an equivalent fraction and you would end up with 5/4. But you didn't have to go to this trouble in the first place. What we could have done instead was spot that the numerator was going to be 27 times 5 and the denominator was going to be 27 times 4, and without bothering to work out what they would be, we'd see that we could then divide each of the numerator and denominator by 27 later on. So why bother multiplying by the 27 in the first place? So we could just cross them out and replace them with a 1. So we are simplifying before doing the working out, and then we would get straight to the answer. Effectively, we would be doing 1/4 multiplied by 5 over 1, or just 5, and we would get straight to 5/4. So we wouldn't have to worry with this extra working down here. We still have one more thing to do because we're being told to give our answers as mixed numbers where possible. So 5/4 I would have to write as 1 and 1/4. If you're not sure about converting between improper fractions and mixed numbers, revisit topic N1c part 3. Now, before we move on to the next example, I just want to go back to those good mathematician habits I mentioned earlier. With a question like this, before you even do any of this working, it's nice to get a sense of roughly how big an answer you will be getting. In this case, notice we've got 27/4 divided by 27/5. Fifths are smaller than quarters. So 27/5 is less than 27/4. So our question is a little bit like this one. We've got a quantity divided by a smaller quantity. And that means we're going to get an answer that's greater than 1. So without doing any serious working, you should be expecting that you're going to get an answer that's greater than 1. And we can see here we clearly did. It's 1 and a bit. Here's the second example. Just by looking at this and without writing anything down, can you decide whether the answer is going to be greater than 1 or less than 1? Pause the video, have a think about it, and then hit play again. Hopefully you spotted that we've got a larger quantity divided by a smaller quantity. 23/37 is greater than 14/37. So it's like this situation, which means we're going to get an answer that is greater than 1. Now we don't know what it's going to be just yet, but we know it's going to be greater than 1. Now let's do the division the way you've already seen. We have 23/37 and we're going to multiply by the reciprocal of 14/37. So that means we're going to multiply by 37/14. And hopefully you can see here that we can simplify before having to work out 23 times 37 or 37 times 14. If we did work out 23 times 37 and 37 times 14 to get the numerator and denominator of our answer, we would have both the numerator and denominator being divisible by 37. So I'm actually going to do that beforehand to save myself the trouble. 37 divided by 37 is 1. 37 divided by 37 is 1. So all I'm really doing is 23 over 1 multiplied by 1 over 14. And that gives me an answer of 23 over 14. Let's go back to these ideas we had on the right hand side. What we've actually got in this example is similar to this idea we had at the bottom. 14 centimetres divided by 2 centimetres, giving us 7, not 7 centimetres. 14 centimetres divided by 2 centimetres. It's like 23/37 divided by 14/37. So in this case we can think of the 37ths as behaving a little bit like centimetres. In this example down here, the centimetres effectively cancel out and we get just 7. So all we're really doing is the 14 divided by 2. In this question, we have 23/37 divided by 14/37. The 37ths effectively cancel out, and all we really need to do is 23 divided by 14. And 23 divided by 14 is simply 23/14. So if you get comfortable with this idea, you can actually go from here to here without even needing to do this working in the middle. Now, we haven't actually finished the question. We need to convert 23/14 into a mixed number, and that is going to be 1 and 9/14. Again, if you're not sure about converting between improper fractions and mixed numbers, you need to go back to topic N1C, part 3. Here's the third example. Now, this looks a little different from the previous two, but remember, this just means divided by. So we can rewrite this as 9/10 divided by 12/55. And then we can do this just like we did the previous questions. But before we do, try and predict, is the answer to this going to be less than 1 or greater than 1? Pause the video and have a quick think. Hopefully you've realised that the answer is going to be greater than 1. This quantity here, 9/10, is almost 1 whole, whereas 12/55 is quite a small fraction. It's less than a quarter. So we're going to have a large quantity divided by a small quantity, so something like this, which means the answer will be greater than 1. Let's carry on with the solution. 9/10 divided by 12/55 is the same as 9/10 multiplied by the reciprocal of 12/55, which is 55/12. I can simplify before doing the multiplying. I can spot a common factor of 5 between these. 5 goes into 55 11 times, and it goes into 10 twice. I can also spot a common factor of 3 between these. So 3 goes into 9 3 times, and 3 goes into 12 4 times. That then gives us 3 over 2 multiplied by 11 over 4, which is 33 over 8. And finally, we need to write that as a mixed number. And that is 4 and 1/8. Here's the final example. Again, before you do any serious working out, just try and predict, is the answer going to be greater than 1 or less than 1? Pause the video and have a quick think. Hopefully you spotted that the answer is going to be less than 1 because we've got a smaller quantity, 2 and a bit basically, divided by a larger quantity, 3 and a bit. So it's like this example on the right hand side, a smaller quantity divided by a larger quantity, which means we'll get an answer that's less than 1. Coming back to the question then, something that's different about this from the previous examples you've seen is that this is given to you using mixed numbers. Now, with something like this, I would first turn both of these into improper fractions. 2 and 5/13 is actually going to be 31/13. And then I'm going to divide that by 3 and 1/7, and 3 and 1/7 is 22/7. Now I can carry on. That means I've got 31/13 multiplied by 7/22. Now, there is no simplifying I can do here straight away, so I'm just going to have to multiply the numerators across and multiply the denominators. 31 times 7 is 217, and 13 times 22 gives me 286. Now, as we said at the beginning, this is less than 1 whole, and therefore we can't write it as a mixed number, and we'll just leave it as it is.